Hey everyone, this is Joshua Close, and today I'm going to show you how to get this blue caption text over your Realflow previews. Some people have noticed that in one of my recently posted breakdowns, if you pause the video at just the right time, you can get a look at my Realflow interface, and there's this blue text on the upper right hand side that shows you which emitters were in the scene as well as which daemons and the settings associated with them. And possibly most importantly, the scene file that the preview is generated from. It's a really helpful tool that I've been using for a while now, and I can't even remember what it's like not to have it, but it works using Realflow's Show Preview Caption option that allows you to put text in this top right corner of the screen, and you can just manually type it in, but a friend and coworker of mine named Mike Zugswert came up with a Python script that sets it automatically. He's also on Vimeo right here. So his Python script will take the emitters in the scene and the daemons, and it will take any settings that you want and put them into this caption, and it allows you to quickly look through your previews and figure out what changed from preview to preview. If you're like me, I save every preview that I make as I'm working on a shot, so my previews folder gets pretty big. And it's really helpful to be able to go through each preview that I generate and quickly see which daemons were introduced and what settings changed. So today we're going to take a look at how the script started and how it is now and how to get it up and running in your Realflow, because it's a really helpful tool, so we'd like to share it with you. I mentioned that I've been using this script for a little while now, so I dug up some of my old Realflow projects and found that I've been using some version of it for a little over a year now, and this was what it looked like in the beginning. This actually isn't using a script. This was just with the Realflow captions enabled, and then I would manually type it in, and that was how I did it once I learned that you could enable the captions. And then Mike took it to the next level by creating this Python script that would just do all the work for us. And then we found it particularly useful with this project, and I think this might have been the project when we decided that we needed to start keeping track of this stuff, and that might have been when he wrote it. But the camera moves really close to the fluid in this shot, so any minor change in the settings would change the simulation pretty dramatically, and you could see it in the shot. So it was really helpful to be able to load up 5 different versions of the shot and just be able to look at a glance which setting changed and how the simulation changed as a result. So it really helps you fine-tune things, especially something where it's that important when the camera is that close. And then another feature that it has that I think is one of its best features is that it can keep track of your animated properties of your scene. It calculates on a per frame basis, so it can tell you all of this information all in your preview just by glancing at it and looking at it, and that's really helpful. And I'll let you know before we get into the Python part of this tutorial that Mike and I started writing for a blog called The Edible Poly, and he has a post on there called Realflow Preview with Caption where he goes over exactly how to do it in much less length than I do. He just gives you the script and he lets you run with it. So if you don't want me to come between you and the script, feel free to jump ahead. I'll have a link for this down below so you can just start playing with it. And it is as easy as copy and paste. Like, you can just put it into your simulation flow and start using it. He shows you how to simply paste it in, and he shows you how to use PyQt as well. And we've found that this instruction that he gives doesn't work with Mac interfaces yet. But feel free to just go ahead and use it. If you do have a Mac, this option 1 will work. Just pasting it into the simulation flow will still work. But I also should let you know that I'm not an expert in Python. I'm actually quite the opposite. I'm a beginner. And everything I know, Mike actually taught me. So with that said, we're going to go into Realflow, and I'm going to show you how this script works. So let's take a look. So here we are in Realflow, and I'm going to show you an older version of the script before I show you the new one, just to give you a quick understanding of how it works. So the first thing that you need to do is go into the View menu and toggle Show Preview Caption. That's what allows the text to just show up right there. And I mentioned earlier that you could type it in manually if you wanted to. That's how I did it in the beginning. If you go to the Preview section of the preferences, you can see top right caption here. You can type anything you want in here. potatoes, and that will show up in the caption, and that's what the script does, is it sets that. So if we go into our simulation flow and take a look at this older version of the script, you can see that it works on simulation frame. It could also work on simulation begin, but then you wouldn't be able to track animated properties. So on simulation frame, we set a variable for each property and each element of the scene that we want to keep track of. So if you want an emitter, you just have to put in a value. You need a variable for that emitter. And any setting that you want to keep track of, you gotta define those as well. And then all of that stuff that you define simply gets set as the preview caption. So there's a title followed by a colon and then the variable that you defined up here. So that's all that the script is doing, and then there's some extra areas to describe the scene. But once you have this in here and it's active, if we simulate our scene, then it updates just like that. And that's how the script works. So now we'll take a look at the newer version of the script, which is much more versatile. I'm going to clear out my simulation flow so we can start from scratch. So if you follow the link below to the Edible Poly website, in the Realflow section you can see Mike's post for the preview caption, and we're gonna follow option 1 and paste this into our simulation flow. So we just need to grab the code here, copy it, then come into Realflow and paste it. And as long as this is set to active, you're good. You can start to simulate and it will track. And that's all you really need to do. So if you want to change some properties of the script, you can set true or false for emitters, daemons, and objects. If they're false, then they won't show up. You can set the amount of decimal places that you want it to round to. You can add some notes to the scene, and down here you can choose which properties you want it to track. You can add anything you want to this list that's a property, and if the object, daemon, or emitter doesn't have the property, then it will just skip over it. And it will actually give you a message down here. You can see it where it says parameters surface tension not found. That just means something in the scene didn't have that, and you can ignore those because that's the whole point of how this works. It's so it won't error if you have an extra property in there. So now if you come down to the section that's on simulation frame, this is the actual bulk of the script. So we start out with thing list here, which is our empty list, and then we are going to test to see if the emitters is true, and this was the property up here where we set it to true or false. So down here, this is the same as writing if emitters equals true. We just don't need that syntax. So it will test if it's true, and then it will iterate through for each emitter in the particle-based emitters in your scene, and it will append them to thing list. And it will do the same for daemons and objects. And once we have all of those in the list, if they are true, then we will move on to the parameters list. We start with an empty list again, and then we also have a variable here called caption string that we define as an empty string, and we're going to use that in just a little bit. But next we have for each item in thing list, and that means each one of these emitters, daemons, and objects that were added, we check the parameter called simulation to make sure that it is not set to inactive. The reason for that is because they can also be set to cache up here. So anything that's active or cache will move on from here. So the name of each one of those iterative objects, daemons, or emitters will be appended to the parameters list if it is active or cache, with a series of underscores on both sides of it, as well as a return, which is what this is, a new line. And that's what this looks like up here with circle with the underscores on either side of it. It's kind of a heading. And then for each parameter in this parameters list that we defined up here, so it will go through each one of those, and if the item has that parameter, so what this says is if circle 1 has this iterative parameter and it is not none, if it doesn't return none, then it will append it to the parameters list followed by a colon, And the reason that this is none is because 0, it can't be set to 0, because if it's 0, then it will return false, meaning if your speed is set to 0, or, I do have values set to 0 in here, and those will come back as false, and then they won't get added to the parameters list, so they need to be set to none. Now, once they're added to the parameters list with the colon, which is this right here, you can see, next we need the value, so then it will append the actual, numerical value of each parameter, and then following that, it will append a new line. And you'll see here there's a little space after this line. That's actually important because when you create a new line, it creates a small space, but if you put a space after it, it counts that as a character. So that's why over here on the right, you can see that there's a larger space between vrandom and sheeter1. That's because there's a space in here, and that's what this little number is. So if I were to remove that and then simulate, we lose that space. So just keep that in mind. That's why that's there. And then we actually include another return there. I'm going to hit this again. And then it will just go through each parameter doing that. So that's how you get everything that exists in here, and then it will move on and do each iterative item and thing lists. So next, it will take each item in the param list and it will try to round it based on the decimal value that you set up here. Ours is set to 4 right now. It's trying to round it. You can't just tell it to round it, because if you have a circle and you're tracking the type property that's set to liquid, you can't round that. So it will give you an error. So if it cannot round it, it will just pass through it. Next, it will redefine our variable that we set up here as just an empty string, and it will add the item. And the item is the newly rounded value from param list. And then the last step is to set the preview caption to the caption string, which is that item, and then at the very end it adds notes. And here's what where the actual notes variable goes, and that's from right up here. So that's the last part of it. So that is how the script works. So we hope that you found this script useful. You can find future posts, scripts, and tutorials by Mike, myself, and some other experienced people that we work with on the ediblepoly.com. I will also be posting my stuff to my website, and Mike and I are both on Vimeo also. So you can feel free to let us know any problems or thoughts that you had on the script, or any ideas you might have. Hope that helps.